All right, welcome. I'm going to wait a minute while everyone makes it into the room. So thank you for your patience in the meantime. Just waiting for everyone to get settled. All right, super. And then as I speak, more people come. So just to introduce myself, my name is Grace Fisher. I am an Associate Dean of Admission at Reed. And you are here for a session on finding your college virtually, doing a virtual college search. Even though nowadays there are more and more options for going back to sort of in-person physical visits to college campuses and so on, I think there's still a lot of value to thinking about how to, other ways that you can find information now that so many colleges have launched virtual visit options, and using your virtual visit options to maybe narrow down. So when you do go, if you do have the chance to visit in person, you can be very strategic with your choices. Or if you don't, you can still have the confidence that you're making a good choice about college, even if you aren't able to set foot on campus first. So what I want to talk about today is first sort of the college, is stepping back and looking at the college search a little bit more broadly, how to think about the college search, how to make a decision on what colleges might be a good fit for you. Then talk a little bit about what is out there, how can you use various different kinds of virtual visit options to get the information you need, and then I will have some ramble and closing thoughts, and of course take questions throughout. If you're not as familiar with Zoom, which may still be possible, the best way to ask questions is using the chat box that you can find at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a smaller screen or a phone, you press the 3 dots and then there's a chat box. So that is the best way to ask any questions, since we've got a pretty full session. Yes, Leandro has found it. Thank you for testing it out. So the first thing I want to talk about with regards to the college search is that I think although it is an intimidating process, or one that's quite built up in media and sort of public consciousness, and I certainly felt that way when I did mine, it also can be a cool time to learn more about yourself. It can be an opportunity for self-discovery. And I think approaching it with that mindset makes it less intimidating. So instead of starting with a list of, I'm looking at these colleges because I'm familiar with them, I've heard about them from my friends, or they're where other people in my school go to. Instead, thinking about first, what kind of experience do you want? What do you know about who you are at this moment in your life? And then try to match that to particular colleges, rather than starting from the list first. I think it's an important, you'll have the best possible outcomes if you're going in with organization and with open-mindedness to the idea that there might be schools that you don't know about that are going to be really awesome for you. You might decide halfway through the process that the thing you thought you were looking for, you actually don't care about at all. And here I use myself as an example. I started my college search looking exclusively at music schools and schools with music conservatories, because I thought I wanted to be a professional musician. Obviously, that is not what I'm doing with my life. And I am really, and during the audition process, when I was doing audition tapes and stuff, I realized, oh, if I was a professional musician, the rest of my life would be like this. It would be competing about music, which is what that felt like to me. And I hated that feeling. So that was a useful thing to learn before I went to school. And I think that was an example of like allowing the process to change my mind, allowing the process to teach me more about myself. And I think, if you can enter the college search with, both a sense of self and also an openness to learning new things about yourself, you'll have the best outcome. You'll make the best possible match. So in getting to know yourself, I have some questions that might be useful in figuring out what that fit might be. And I think fit can be in a bunch of different dimensions. It can be, because you can have a great match in any 2 out of these 3 and still not end up being happy where you're at. You might find a place with a great vibe where everyone around, with tons of people around you, are people you want to be friends with. But if they don't teach the thing that you want to learn, you're going to have a bad time. That's the most obvious. But there also might be schools that are really great at whatever you want to study, that have the kind of clubs and activities that you like, but where something about the school's ethos or values just make it an uncomfortable fit for you. And it's okay to say no to that school, even if it looks perfect on paper, just because it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like, this is a place that will have my back, where I will be proud to have its back. So going through these 3 different sort of areas, academic, student life, and ethos or values or vibe even. Academically speaking, maybe, and you can take notes on this if you want or not. I can also always send these questions via email later, but some questions I like to ask to sort of get your juices flowing. Think about a time when you felt especially engaged in the classroom. And what was it about that classroom experience that was so fulfilling to you? Was it because, the lecture was just absolutely fascinating, you were hearing from an expert and you were just drinking it all in? Was it engaging because it was an active discussion space? You were having a great conversation and didn't even notice when the bell rang. Although most bells in classrooms are pretty loud these days. Maybe it was around a lab table or in a shop where you were doing something physical with your hands. Some colleges will have much more of one style of learning. If you love lectures, if you like sort of being part of a big crowd, larger schools are going to have a lot more of those. If you really like to be known, if you feel like your best learning is done actively, then smaller schools or large schools where you can make them smaller might be a much better setting. Think about whether you're interested in learning about a lot of different subjects or specializing in one field right away. I think the average college student changes their major 4 times, is one statistics I've heard. Changes their major might mean different things at different places, but that was actually true for me. And the final time I changed my major was at the beginning of my senior year, which I would not recommend. But it was really good that I was in a college where I was able to do that. I had the flexibility and I had been encouraged to explore in a bunch of different directions, instead of having to force myself through a major that I didn't like because I was locked in from the very beginning. And the other thing, I looked for school that would ask me to take classes in a lot of different subject areas, because I felt like, my vision of future me, of educated me, capital E educated me, was someone who was, comfortable and competent, at least at a basic level, in, as comfortable talking about like science as literature. Now, obviously, I went much harder in one direction than the other, but I was excited that I was going to graduate from college knowing how to read a scientific paper, even if I didn't know what all the big words meant, or could read all the titles of the proteins. And so I really benefited from a broad, what's often called a liberal arts education. But for other folks, like colleges, I want to learn how to do this particular job, this particular skill. I want to become a nurse. I want to place with an RN program. And that is much more important. So thinking about what kind of education will be most fulfilling to you, and then kind of adding that to your list of what you're looking for. Think about how you want to interact with your faculty. Some schools will have a much more kind of formal ethos or formal feel with faculty, where you're using people's titles and everything, a little bit of distance. Other schools will be much more informal. At Reed, we all go by first names, for example. So, which I think is really important to bridging that distance. But other students don't want that. Think about, your best relationships with, or your best educational experiences so far, and what that relationship has been like, or what you would have liked your relationships with your teachers to be like. Some schools will be much more in one direction or the other. Sometimes that's correlated with size, I'd say fairly frequently too. Smaller schools are more likely to be a little bit more relaxed, kind of intimate feelings with students and faculty. And then, finally, the most basic, but if there is something that you feel pretty strongly that you want to study, do they have it? And if you're not certain, how soon do you have to pick? In terms of student life, there's the basics, like, I play rugby, do they have a rugby team, for example? But I also think student life is beyond that, is about community. When you think about being in community with other people, what does that look like? What does your vision of your college community look like? Consider, the number of people, the abundance of diversity, the ability to be anonymous versus the ability to be known, how easy it is to find a tight-knit group, what feels best for you? How do you make friends right now, and how do you think you might make friends in college? And how would you spend your time with those friends? Is it outdoors? Is it exploring a city? Is it doing a shared activity? Is it hanging out around a video game console? And pretty much all of those will be options at pretty much every college, unless you're super far away from a city, for example. But think about like what you want the most to be the easiest, to be the most common. Think about how you envision your relationship with the community outside the college campus itself. What kind of experiences do you want to have? For some people, they like the idea of being in a smaller city or a small town or out in the countryside, because that increases that sort of tight-knit campus feel, that increases that feeling of that might increase the feeling of kind of we're all in this together, because you're all somewhat isolated, right? And often in those settings, you have access to a lot of nature and outdoors opportunities, versus being in a city where a larger town or suburb of a city, or a city where you have access to all of those amenities, those opportunities. And then, think about the atmosphere. Are you looking to be around people who are driven by this lifelong love of learning? This connects back to academics, versus people who are there to I've got a plan, I've got places to be, I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. Those are just kind of different kinds of people, and you'll always have some variety in your campus, but some campuses will definitely foster one attitude or the other more often. And then talking about ethos or vibe, think about your values and how you want them to be reflected in your college. Do you want to live and learn in a place that's guided by a specific religion or an honor code or a philosophy? What values are most important to you? Whether that's religious values, that's sustainability, That's particular values with regards to equity and inclusion. Many colleges will have espouse similar values, but some will definitely emphasize some more than others. And think about, when you think of your future classmates and the people around you, what is it really important that you have in common? And where are you really looking for there to be diversity and difference? Think also about the kind of environment you want in terms of kind of competition. For some people, being competitive with their peers spurs you forward. It gets you excited. It gets you to push yourself and be your best version of yourself. For others, competition isn't helpful. Competition makes you feel the bad kind of stress and shuts you down a little bit. So that kind of competitive versus more cooperative, collaborative, anti-competitive can be a big source of either resonance with the school or friction with the school culture. And finally, think about, what does school spirit feel like for you? What does it mean to feel school spirit, to feel a sense of belonging? And what does that look like? For some people, it's like the big game. So maybe that's what you want in a college. For others, maybe your high school is all about the big game, but you feel most connected to your institution when you're like at a mock trial competition or playing in the orchestra, or hanging out with your friends on campus or something like that. Different schools will express school spirit in a different way, and I think it's really interesting to envision what that might look like and see if that connects with what you're looking for. So that's all very abstract, right? These sort of loosey-goosey, or being charitable, self-discovery kind of questions. But I think, beyond the facts and figures, it is important to think about a little bit about who you are and what kind of experience will make you feel most fulfilled and connected and happy in college, because the happier you are, the better you're going to do. But I also do want to talk a little bit about nuts and bolts. So everyone's going to have a different organizational tool that works for them. I am a big believer in the massive Google Sheet. And I'll get back to questions in a moment, Leandro and Anu. But thinking about what you're looking for, and then thinking about kind of the more facts and figures stuff that will still be important, or that might be might help you contextualize what you're looking for, like size or things like that, location. So I like a big spreadsheet with a lot of columns, and then you can start noting down, does this school meet this thing I'm looking for, / how big is it, where is it, things like that. When do the applications due? What kinds of applications do they take? What rounds are there? When are materials due, like letters of recommendation? Some schools are super strict, like if the letter isn't there on time with the rest of the application, they won't admit you. Other schools are willing to be a bit more flexible. That said, it's good to hit those deadlines, even if you know that they're flexible. When is the financial aid application due? A lot of times it's at the same time as the application for admission, which can surprise some people. But find your tool. Your tool might change, but just start writing stuff down as you discover it. And it's a lot easier to reorganize information than to do a bunch of research or do a bunch of reading, not write anything down, and then have to go redo your work. Just my onion. Some questions. These values may change, or are they fixed? They can definitely change. And that's okay, and I think to be welcomed. I originally thought that I would be fine going to a school with a dominant sort of religious group, but the more I talked to people who went to those kinds of schools with my background, the more I realized that maybe that wasn't a good fit for me personally. Just because it wasn't what I'd grown up around, and it might make me more uncomfortable than I had thought initially. So I think it can be a learning process. Would you consider Reed more cooperative or competitive? Reed is definitely cooperative. And I think the biggest sign of that is that we actually don't our grading system is one where you don't see your grades unless you ask to. So in your day-to-day life, you're just getting a lot of feedback from your professors. They will be writing all over your assignments, but you won't sort of have that like sense of the running percentage. And if you don't know, if you barely know your own grades, you'll have a sense of how you're doing. But if you're not thinking about like, I'm getting I need to get a 93 on this test so I can keep my A in this class or whatever, you're also not thinking about everyone else's grades. So I think for a lot of readies, that's a big relief. And I think it really fosters cooperation because there's, people aren't worried about, oh, me doing well will mean that I'm better than someone else, or me helping someone else will, change the class grading average or something like that. People just aren't thinking in those terms. We readies are all here on a little quest for self-betterment and self-discovery. So I think readies are often competitive with themselves. They want to do better. They want to push themselves, but certainly not with other people. And Yarrow asks a great question. How do you figure out these looser qualities of a school, like competitive culture? I think, and that's actually a great sort of segue into what I want to talk about next, which is, okay, once you've figured out some of the stuff you're looking for in terms of yourself, how do you match that with schools? So thank you, Yarrow. I want to talk about the different kinds of virtual events and opportunities. Because you're right, you can figure out how big a school is based on their website or some aggregating website like a CapEx or niche or whatever. But figuring out the questions of ethos or vibe are a little bit more difficult. But the great thing is that and colleges were doing some of this before the pandemic, but certainly once the pandemic started, colleges had to figure out very quickly, like, what do people want to know and how do we get that to them, and have developed a lot of different kinds of events. And the reason I've arranged them in a funnel is that because I think each one can serve a different role and should be done at different times in your college search process. I think you should do the most of information sessions in virtual tour, and you should save interviews and student hangouts for schools that you already have a strong idea that you're really into. So, looking at the kind of menu of things, information sessions are usually informative, we hope. They're fact-based. You're hearing from a school official, usually someone who works in the admissions department like me, and they will have prepared things to talk about in terms of how their school's academic works, what kinds of majors there are, what required classes there are, what a student's schedule might look like, kind of those fact-based things. And also in terms of student life, where students live on campus versus off, maybe what kind of dorms exist, what kind of housing options, what kinds of clubs are common, things like that, athletic scenes, stuff like that. And they'll talk about admissions and financial aid. I think the reason I suggest you go to the most of these is because they're very good as an intro, and you'll probably go to some where you'll hear something and be like, oh, that's not what I'm looking for. These are so low investment. Like, obviously I like it when someone has their camera on and is looking at the screen when I'm doing an info session, but if they're not, like, I'm not mad, it's fine. And so you can put it on in the background and just be kind of listening out of the corner of your ear to sort of see, like, does this jive with what I'm looking for? Does this sound exciting? Some of them will sound pretty similar from one to the other, but that'll help you figure out, like, oops, when something does pop out, that'll help you learn about yourself. Like, oh, the way they talked about their teaching style really makes sense for me. That was really exciting. And that'll help you learn, like, oh, maybe this school is good for me, and schools that are similar to it. So it's easy. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to. You can just listen and learn. And I also think it's a good thing to attend a lot of different kinds of, because you'll start hearing the differences between, schools of different sizes or schools in different locations, schools with different educational missions. Virtual tours are similar in that they're generally pretty low investment. Some of them will be pre-recorded, some of them will be live. We have people walking around with little iPads to do live virtual tours. But those will be different in that they're less about kind of data and facts, and often more about stories. Current students telling stories where they'll show you, a location like a dorm, and then talk about community and talk about their dorm experience, for example. And I think that that's really important because you can make your decision on facts alone, obviously, but I think you can make a better decision if you're hearing from current students, you're hearing these stories and feeling like, that's an experience that I'd like to have, or that experience doesn't sound that exciting to me. But it's a good way to get that kind of closer look and feel of a college campus. A lot of schools will also do panels. These are more common, I think, in spring when students have already been admitted and are deciding whether or not they want to come. But those can be a great way to get a sense of, okay, if I was at this particular school, what would it be like to study this thing I'm interested in? I often don't recommend that you do these first because, a school can have a great biology department, but if it's the wrong size, or if it's the rest of the educational experience isn't going to work for you, that's not a great investment of time. But once you already know that this school might be one that's interesting to you in terms of general structure, in terms of student life, then this is kind of probing at that specific, what would it be like to be a biologist here or to study history here? Interviews are, I do a lot of interviews as part of my job. And the most awkward interviews are ones where it's the first time the student is ever coming into contact with my school. Because, spoiler alert, one of the most common interview questions is, why do you want to go to my college? And you feel awkward and I feel awkward if you're sort of like, well, I don't know. This is the first time we're talking. So I think it's again all about this investment of time. I think it's a great way to connect one-on-one with someone who's connected to that college when you know that you've already got something in common with this school, when you can have already started to sort of envision yourself there. But it's not good to be as useful for it to be the first thing you do. That said, I think that they're really great. A lot of schools will both enjoy that you've done an interview, both in the sense that it demonstrates that you're interested, and when we're reading your application, we also get to learn something that we hopefully won't learn anywhere else in your file. What is it like to be in a virtual space with this person? What do they care about enough to talk about it when we have 20, 25 minutes together? And you can ask one-on-one questions. Finally, schools will also do student hangouts. This is another one where I think it's best done for schools that you already know you're into or interested in, just because then you all have something in common with the other people in the room. We've all been in awkward Zoom social situations where no one knows what to talk about or who to start the conversation. And hopefully the college will help facilitate, but I think it's nicer if, you have something in common, like, we've all been admitted to read. Let's all talk about, like, you might talk about what you're thinking about, what other schools you're looking at, what about read you're excited about, what might be the drawbacks. But it's a good way to get a sense of, like, oh, these people might be my future classmates. Are they people that I want to hang out with? But if it was the first thing you did, it would probably be a little awkward. And no one wants to be awkward on Zoom. We've been doing that for a year and a half now. I'll answer some of the read-specific questions in the chat a little bit later. But Jajin Lo asked a good question about how soon to start attending events. Is it too late? It is absolutely not too late. Rising seniors, this is the perfect time. That said, if you're a junior, by all means get started, because the way I think about the college search is that it's about constantly asking questions and answering them and using them to refine your hypothesis. Hopefully you've gone through enough science classes that you've gotten to the scientific method, right? The scientific method isn't I make an assumption about, I decide how the universe works and I set out to prove myself right. I have an idea about how gravity might work, and I'm going to test it by dropping a bunch of stuff on the floor. And I might be right, I might be wrong, but for each thing I drop on the floor, I will hopefully get some data, and I will use that to get a better question. So, it's a, as we say in the tech world, it's an iterative process. It's a step-by-step process where you're constantly redefining your assumptions. You're asking a question, you're answering it, you're getting a better question. Besides events, or the events I've talked about, a lot of colleges are doing workshops like this one. I think those can be super helpful. We also, not to plug, but to plug briefly, we have essay writing workshops, we have interviewing workshops, we have workshops on kind of very basic college application stuff, on financial aid. Those can be a great way to both learn information that will help you generally in the college search, as well as, learning more about a particular school and their ethos. Our essay writing workshop, I think, hopefully helps you write great college essays in general, but we also talk a lot about what we're looking for specifically, and other schools might do the same. Schools will do sessions in your region, whether that's like we're having an event for people in Oklahoma, or virtually, or even nowadays going to Oklahoma. And maybe they can't visit every high school in Oklahoma City, but they'll have a evening event to bring people to a particular location. And lots of schools are also increasing their YouTube presence, or Instagram, or my goodness, TikTok. So that can be hit or miss, because it's made by awkward old people. Yes, we do have an essay writing workshop coming up. I don't know when it is off the top of my head, but if you go to our virtual visit page, virtual events page, you'll be able to find it. But I think in terms of, the college search isn't just about going to these events, it's about making them useful. And the way that you make them the most useful is asking questions. It's cliche, but the more you put in, the more you'll get out. And then thinking critically about what you see. So, in your first information sessions, you might walk in and feel like, I don't know what to ask. That's fine. That's why I suggest you go to a lot of them, because you may not know what questions to ask, but other people will have great questions, and you'll hear what they ask and be like, oh, I also wonder that. And then you can start asking it when you go to different school sessions. Well, thank you, Tess. And let me, I can also grab the sign up link. So, writing your personal state. Yeah, it's 3 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow. Here's the sign up. So, anyway, sorry. So being engaging, and just sort of asking things you wonder about. The other cliche applies, that if you're wondering about it, someone else probably is too. Now, if you have a hyper-specific question, you really want to talk through your individual situation, you might want to do something else, like reach out to your admission counselor. But generally speaking, we like it when people engage with us, so we're not feeling like we're talking into a void. And hopefully you also get the information you need. And I think it can also be cool to kind of ask the same question to a bunch of different schools and hear how they answer differently. They'll emphasize different things, and seeing what one school emphasizes versus the other can help you figure out, like, how, if maybe going to a school with a diverse student body is really important to you, asking how different schools are increasing representation from historically excluded groups. That can really help you figure out, like, not only does a school value this the same way that I do, but what are they doing? And what is it different? How is it different from school to school? So that's that critical thinking piece, both taking down what they say, but also then thinking about, like, what does that tell me about them? So basically, make a list of priorities, attend a lot of sessions, attend a variety of sessions from a variety of schools. and reach out to your regional counselor. Most colleges, especially selective colleges like Reed, operate on a system where one person will be responsible for a particular region, either an entire state, like I have the state of Minnesota, or maybe a part of a state. Like I used to have half of the Bay Area, and it was based on a bunch of zip codes, and it was very confusing. So thankfully, I don't have to deal with that anymore. Sorry, the Bay Area, you were great. But when you have a dedicated admission counselor, that person's job is not just to answer emails from people from Minnesota. Their job is also to get to know all of the high schools in Minnesota and to get to know the people in the high schools in Minnesota. And then when you apply to, for example, Reed College, I might even see your name and be like, oh, Natalia, I remember Natalia. She asked all those great questions in our session. And then a regional counselor like me, part of my job is that to then go in front of the admission committee, all of the other admission counselors, and say, you know, you guys, this is Firuz, and this is why they are super awesome and why we should admit them to Reed. And we had this awesome conversation in my essay writing workshop the other week. So becoming more known to colleges is to your advantage, both in terms of the admission process and, you know, it helps you get more information, which is what you need to make your decisions. Just as you very desperately want colleges to admit you, we very desperately want you to come, right? We want to have our classrooms full. We want our campuses to be vibrant and full of exciting people. And so it's actually this mutual courtship process. And I think making contact with schools both advantages the school in terms of knowing who might want to come, and advantages you in terms of getting the information you need to make a decision. The final thing that I realize is not really covered in this presentation, that's kind of a bridge, is like, okay, how do I decide which school sessions to attend? Like, how do I identify schools that might meet my my checklist of things I'm looking for? So I do want to briefly talk about some of the different tools that you have. The tools that I use the most, I know they're old-fashioned these days, but I use those big fat guidebooks that my guidance counselor had in her office. I even bought one of the Insider's Guide to Colleges or something, and like had it in the bathroom when I was a senior in high school, and I just kind of read it for fun. And I found a lot of schools that way that I might want to research more. There are also websites that will do this for you now, where you can put in like geographical areas or size or religious affiliations or various things that are important to you that you definitely do or don't want. You can narrow down your list that way. But some of the more ephemeral stuff, some of the more spiritual things, the kind of ethos questions, are going to, the easiest way I think is from person to person. And that just doesn't just mean asking your friends, because like, no offense, but your friends are also in the same phase of life as you. So, you know, maybe some of them are super aggressive into the college search and would be good sources of information, but there are trained professionals whose whole job is to help you with this. So I know how guidance counselors in high schools these days, college counselors have huge loads, but it is their job to help you. And so if you drop in their office hours, if you send them an email, if you say like, hey, I'd love your help on this, they're supposed to help you out. And they do this job because they want to help you out. I think what you can do is make it easier for them and say things like, it's really important for me to go to a school that is A, B, and C. Can you think of any schools I should look at? Or I just had a great visit with Reed. I really loved what they had to say. When you think about Reed, what other schools do you think about? They might be really good at that kind of comparator stuff. So asking trusted adults like a college counselor, you know, a teacher that you know super well or knows you super well, things like that can also be good ways to kind of start making those matches. But frankly, if you're not sure, just the thing I used to advise people to do in terms of physical visits is, you know, maybe flying across the country is super expensive and not something that you're ready to do right now. start by going to colleges in your own backyard. Even if, you know, like me, I knew that I wanted to leave my hometown, but visiting those local colleges, even if I knew I didn't want to attend, helped me figure out like, oh, I really like the feel of a school that does this with their curriculum, or it's really important for me to go to a school that where students share this value or something like that. So it can get you started, even if you end up deciding that you don't want to attend. But a car trip or a subway trip is a lot less investment than a plane trip. All right, now I'm going to do questions. So there were a couple of read questions earlier that I want to answer real quick. Dorm policy, our students are required to live on campus for their first 2 years. You can petition for an exception, but that's an important way that we build community. And our dorms are in neighborhoods. So freshmen and sophomores are mostly living together, and juniors and seniors are mostly living together. So you're living with people who are having similar experiences to you, which helps with the whole bonding thing, making friends. Our dorms are all co-ed, but roommates is based on, you know, being matched with people of a particular gender. You can choose what gender you want to be matched with. Good support for international students. I certainly hope they feel that way. We try really hard to support our international students, and that's included during the pandemic. You know, we had a bunch of classes that we taught in the evenings so that students in different time zones who couldn't get a visa to come to campus could still take classes. We tried to get as many students to campus as we could, but for some that wasn't the case. We didn't want to make them wake up at 1 a.m. to take their classes, for example. And you know, Portland is a friendly city. There's a lot to do around here. It's a pretty, you know, safe and pleasant city to live in. And we have great people working in our international student services. Let's see. Would it be embarrassing to ask a question in a virtual session that could be easily found on a school website? That's a good question. I mean, I don't know what's embarrassing to you. I don't mind answering the question of how, for example, how big is Reed? Someone could look that up, but also if you're there, it's something you want to learn, I'm going to answer that question, you know? And I'm not going to be mad that someone asked it, because sometimes that stuff is harder to dig up than you think. If it's important to you to make a decision on a school, you should ask it, because that is the purpose of these sessions, these information sessions, to get you the information you need, not to go on my particular monologue. I would say there's a difference between that and like having a bullet point list of 30 things to ask, because, you know, there might be other people in the crowd who want to know other things. So you don't want to monopolize time. So you might want to be more selective, but, you know, some of this is just like some of the students that I've talked to that have been felt most successful at their college searches are ones who've kind of treated it like a big research project, like an extra class. And so you should expect to do some independent work on your own I think you'll have a better outcome. You'll feel more confident in your choice if you feel like you've put in a lot of time into researching. But like, I'm never mad at someone for asking a question. It's much better than me just going on about whatever I feel like blabbering on about, you know? So err on the side of asking questions. The other thing I think can be helpful is there are websites that do aggregate information, like a niche or a CapEx or Naviance does this too, where you can sort of, like, if it's something like how big is this school, you can pretty easily just type in like a school and get all the quick facts about them and put it into your spreadsheet that way. So that might make it faster. How much should I listen to my parents? I have to be careful what I say because this video might be posted on YouTube. As little as you can get away with. What I mean by that is I would say you can listen to your parents in terms of they hopefully know you pretty well. They have a good idea. They've watched you grow up over the last 16 years. They have an idea of your motivations, what situations you do well in, what gets you excited. But that's not the case for every student, first of all. There might be things that you don't tell your parents. I certainly know there were when I was 16, 17. And so I think you can take in their input and say, thanks, I'll think about that. Do some good active listening. But if you have an overriding sense that is like, they're just wrong about this thing about me, listen to yourself, because ultimately you're the one going to college. When it comes to the college application process, so much has changed in 10, 20, 30 years that I think a lot of parents have, their idea of how college works was formed a long time ago, if your parents had the privilege of going to college. And so I think there is better information out there. If it's, the difference between what your parents say versus what a college admission officer like me says, I would trust me. And that's not just because I am myself doing this job, but when I say, here's what colleges are looking for, I am part of the college that is actively looking for a thing. I'm the one making that decision when I'm reading an essay. So I probably know a little bit better. And it's not in my interest to lie about that. It is in my interest to be truthful, because I want people to make a good decision. Right. So trust but verify, maybe. See it as one source of information amongst many. How do you get in the beautiful Trillium dorm? Put it as your top priority. And what Reed has done, what we strive to do is, if you know that Reed is your very top choice, if you know that you would love to be here, applying early decision, we also try to give early decision students their first or second choice of dorm. Can you request to live with a specific person? Yes. If you want an office hour with an international student counselor, we have virtual one-on-one meetings, and you can sign up. And when you sign up, you can say, I'm an international student and I would like to meet with a counselor who works with international students. Let's see, I've got 3 more minutes. How important are extracurricular activities to Reed? They're important, but not because we want people who've been doing a particular activity in and of itself, or we want to see that you're insanely busy and overloaded, because we actually don't want that for you. But rather, we're trying to figure out, when this person is on our campus, we don't just want to know that they will be able to do the homework. We're building a community. And so we want to know, how will this person participate and give back to their community here? And the good news is that looks really different from student to student. Some students will give back to community by being a leader in the artistic scene here, or the musical scene, or the athletic scene. Other students, and I'll see that from their activities list, that they're really into, orchestra or rugby or whatever. Other students' contributions are going to look a little different, because, maybe what you do, your biggest activity is after school, from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., you're taking care of your younger siblings while you're waiting for your parents to get home from work. I might not know what clubs that person will join at Reed, but I know that that person has developed a lot of skills in terms of patience and caring and all the things that are required to deal with younger siblings. I say as an older sibling myself, if that wasn't clear. That person's going to be a really great roommate, right? They're community minded, even if I don't know what clubs they're going to be in. So Reed is looking for a diversity of different kinds of community contributors, but we do look to the activities list to help get a sense of your character, your interests, your passions, and your potential contributions. How important is GPA when applying? It's important in that not just because we look at, you know, if 100 students apply and we are going to admit 33% of students, we say, okay, we'll take the top 33 GPAs. That's not how it works. Instead, I always encourage people to think about, like, why does a college care about GPA? Not just because they're looking for the best student. Best can mean a lot of different things, but we want students who are going to succeed here. And students' grades in their high school classes, especially in their most rigorous high school classes, are the best indicator of their ability to do well at Reed. If you do well in high school, you're going to do well here, most likely. That said, you know, high school is a long 4 years. Students can have ups and downs. Students can take more or less rigorous classes. And so I actually don't spend a lot of time looking at a student or thinking about a student's GPA, because what I spend much more time on is looking at your transcript and looking at trends over time. What have you taken on and how have you done in that? What subjects have you focused on? Where have you pursued extra rigor? Rather than just like looking at the GPA and making assumptions about that, what that means. Because especially if you're in a weighted GPA system, a 3.5 can mean you get a mix of A's and B's. It can mean you get mostly A's, but have a couple D's in there. Those are different experiences, right? So we spend a lot of time looking beyond the GPA, but we are looking for students who have shown that they're ready to thrive at Reed. Tess, thank you so much. Those are some great suggestions of websites. I know, Aiden, for example, you had a specific question. I don't have time to get to all of the questions I've gotten. I would definitely encourage you to continue asking questions by getting in touch with your admission counselor, because it is our job as counselors to really get to know you, like I was saying, and this is your chance with these great questions that you have to start building this relationship. So if you email admission@reed.edu, and it's especially helpful if you say, like, I am from Minnesota or I am from Peru, wherever it might be, then we can match you with your admission counselor and you can ask them whatever questions you might have. So thank you so much for coming. I'm glad to see some positive feedback in here. I'm sorry I didn't get to all questions, but I hope you have a wonderful college application process with as little stress and as much self-discovery as possible. And I hope to get to see some of your applications next year. So have a wonderful afternoon, evening, or morning, whatever time you are in. And all the best.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.